Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can all see me. I'm sure you can all hear me. My name is Martin Clark. I'm the director here at Bergen Kunsthal, and I'm delighted to welcome you all on this very beautiful, it feels like summer's suddenly come to Bergen, overnight. Very beautiful day, and it's great to see so many of you here for this Plattform event, which is in association with the opening of the Festival Exhibition for 2017, which this year is been produced by Jan Groth. I'm going to say a little bit about the format of this event, and I'm going to say a few words of introduction. In terms of the format, I'm delighted to be joined by Steinar Sekkingstad, who's the curator here at Bergen Kunsthal, and who's worked incredibly closely with both myself, but also with Jan, on the preparation of the exhibition, but also the publication which we've produced to accompany this show. Unfortunately, we're still waiting for an arrival of publications. We had some advance publications that arrived a couple of days ago, so they are available for you to look at and see, and we're very much hoping that the next shipment comes in today. But if you are interested in buying a publication, please just speak to the receptionist downstairs and we can take your name and make sure that we get these to you as soon as possible. But anyway, Steinar worked very closely on the book and also wrote an essay for the publication. And he's going to deliver a short talk paper based on that essay, which will last about 25 minutes. We're then going to have a discussion about Jan's exhibition downstairs, talk a little bit about our curatorial approach to putting that show together. And then I'm going to make sure that there's some time for questions from you as well, because we're delighted that Jan's with us here, right at the front. And so it'll be very nice to be able to involve Jan, and I'm sure you'd be happy to answer any questions and certainly correct Steinar and I if we go wrong at any moment. So please feel free to heckle Jan from the crowd. Many of you will either know Jan himself or know his work. For those of you who are less familiar, Jan is undoubtedly one of the most prominent and important Norwegian artists of the last, 50 years really. In that time, he's exhibited all over the world. He spent many years living and teaching in New York and was a very active part of the art scene there through the late 60s, early 70s and into the 80s. He's now based in Oslo. My interest in Jan's work came through conversations with a younger generation of artists. And I've said this before in a couple of the speeches that I've made over the last couple of days, so apologies for those of you who've been at a number of these events. But I think it's important to reiterate that the Festival Exhibition, whether it's a younger artist or a more senior figure, is never a retrospective, it's never a survey, it's never a celebration of a life or a lifetime achievement award. It's very much about Bergen Kunsthal looking at who we consider to be making some of the most vital, timely and important work at this moment. And again, the Festival Exhibition is traditionally a solo exhibition by a Norwegian artist and remains probably the most important solo exhibition in Norway. So we were very honoured when Jan agreed to make this show, and we were also delighted to be able to present a show downstairs which is almost entirely new work. Almost all of the work in those galleries has been produced in 2017. But we're going to come on to talk about the exhibition a little bit later. Jan's work is held in collections all over the world, some of the most important museums. It's an extraordinary biography, actually. From the Tate Gallery in London, National Museum in Oslo, of course, Louisiana in Denmark, but also the Whitney Museum in America, the Museum of Modern Art in New York. Jan had a very important solo show at the Guggenheim in New York in the 80s. So it feels incredibly timely to be presenting this exhibition here in Bergen. And as I said earlier, we're very honoured not just to be able to work in this way with Jan, but to produce a show of essentially entirely new work. So, I'm going to say one other thing before we begin, because some of you who were here earlier, and I know Jan was here for this, would have been able to enjoy the concerts that we've arranged. This is a new initiative for us this year, working with the Festspillene. And I'm delighted that Peter Shepherd-Skarved, who's here in the audience as well, has been working incredibly closely with Jan over the last 12 or so months in response to Jan's visual art, his drawing, his sculpture, his practice. And Peter is a musician and a composer and has made a number of new compositions, I don't know how you describe them, kind of musical almost kind of tone poem responses to Jan's work. And as I say, in very close dialogue with Jan. And we're very excited that these will be performed throughout today and tomorrow. And I just want to mention that the first one was at 12 o'clock. There'll be another performance at 3 o'clock today. And then there's performances at 12, 3, and 4:30 tomorrow. So please do come and enjoy those in the galleries in front of the exhibition. So, I've said enough, I'm sure, as an introduction. I'm going to pass over to Steinar now, who's going to, as I say, talk a little bit about Jan's work from the context of the essay that he produced.
Thank you. Yeah, what we thought I'd do as a first part of this is actually to read something that I've never really done before, I think, read out loud one of my essays. Not going to do the whole thing. But I picked two kind of sections from the text that I think can work as a background for a conversation afterwards. Yeah, I'll start from the beginning. The blank sheet is an absorbent on whose bare surface the very slightest application of pigment leaves definitive traces. The white space is a container where any object charges the situation with its presence. Jan Groth works within this white, empty openness. In his work, he adds judicious elements of black to the white, to paper, space, surface. The line in a drawing cuts through the empty silence. The black surface of a woven tapestry vibrates with the interspersed white threads. Slender sculptures stand like inscriptions in space. These markings that Groth adds are, for all their austerity, enough to fill the absence with a living human presence. Economical with his resources, he makes both the exhibition space and the individual artworks part of an integrated field, a zone you step into and occupy. In a delicate combination of holistic composition and spontaneous improvisation, Jan Groth performs a calm, controlled jazz. His visual expression is refined and cool. Intellectual, introverted, relaxed, consummate, serious, and without showy effects. And here I could maybe add that the title of the text, I call it Cool Jazz. And these last sort of adjectives that I just read I was looking for a definition of cool jazz, the musical term, and found on the Norwegian Wikipedia, actually, these exact words that I found was kind of appropriate to just put onto Jan's work. So intellectual, introverted, relaxed, consummate, serious, and without showy effects. Okay. In the encounter between the various elements of black within all that white, the notion disappears that white represents something neutral, sterile, and empty. The white in Groth's work constitutes one or more white colors. Nor is the black ever just black. In this case, it's several exact shades, from the deep black in the patinated bronze to the translucent lines drawn in crayon on paper, or the composite black-brown color of the thread used in the tapestries. The black is never a black that blocks off and shuts out information. The line is fragile and the support shines through, both in the fibers in the paper beneath the drawing and the combination of almost white and almost black threads that surround one another in the constructed lines of the weave. The last time Jan Groth works were exhibited here in Bergen Kunsthall's galleries was in 1974. The few installation photographs that remain from this exhibition, in what at the time was known as Bergens Kunstforening, are an effective time machine. Looking now at the photos of Groth's drawings and tapestries exhibited in the same rooms over 40 years ago, brings both the oeuvre and the exhibition spaces into sharp relief. One of the first things you notice is how the exhibition in 1974 was furnished almost like a domestic interior. The large exhibition halls were equipped with benches, tables, chairs, and flower arrangements. In addition, the natural daylight from the skylit roof ensured that both the artworks and the wall and the homely interior were subjected to changing light at different points in the room at different times of the day. Now, architecturally, the galleries are the same today as in 1974. They have the same proportions and the same rhythm running through several adjacent rooms of the different sizes. But they have been tightened up considerably. Neutral artificial lighting fills the exhibition with the same even intensity. The radiators early embedded in the walls have gone, as have the ventilation hatches and the hanging light fittings, and the rail that once marked the transition between the part of the wall that belonged to the artwork and the area above, which was also wall but was nevertheless seen as belonging to the ceiling area, has been removed. While the exhibition architecture in 1974 helped to make the large spaces a little more intimate, today's exhibition space is more rigorous, cooler, and not least more open. Absolutely all of the large wall surfaces now belong to the domain of the artwork. The idea, or perhaps the illusion of the neutral space, is a modernist convention for exhibition architecture that was already making its impact when Bergen Kunstforening's new building was being built in the middle of the 1930s, but which in many ways has been reinforced with the passage of time. In the middle of the 1970s, artists increasingly made active use of exactly this display convention. The neutral exhibition space became a site. The work of art increasingly entered into a dialogue with the whole space, the walls, the floor, the ceiling, and not least the space in between, activating the emptiness between the object and the architecture, the artwork and the viewer. Photographs from Bergen Kunstforening in 1974 thus also tells us something about changes in institutional practice and shifting conventions for exhibiting visual art. Perhaps the furnishing of the space was not quite up to date with the developments in progressive artistic practice. Or were we still saddled with an understanding that the artworks were to be regarded as isolated pictorial worlds, tidily hung on any old wall? Maybe it was a deliberate curatorial approach to stage the spaces in this particular way. Jan Groth's work in many ways invites both possibilities. At the same time, it's worth noting that Jan Groth was at this time part of an international art scene and was establishing himself in New York, actively engaged in an artistic environment where these very conventions were being tested and challenged in ways that have had crucial importance to how art has been presented and experienced ever since. In 1974, Groth had already had his international breakthrough with a successful exhibition at the Art Institute of Chicago, 1973, as well as several other American museums. In addition, he had exhibited twice at the premises of the influential gallerist Betty Parsons in New York. Parsons was at the time a force to be reckoned with in New York art, having first played an instrumental role in the dissemination of abstract expressionists in the 40s and 50s, with the early exhibitions of Jackson Pollock, Mark Rothko, Ed Reinhardt, Clifford Still, and Barnett Newman, and later by being among the first to show artists like Agnes Martin, Ellsworth Kelly, Jasper Johns, and Robert Rauschenberg. And then, early in the 1970s, a new generation of artists were beginning to dominate Parsons' exhibition program, and Jan Groth was then in company of artists like Richard Tuttle, Ruth Vollmer, and Richard Francisco. So, in retrospect, it's perhaps not so difficult to see how Jan Groth's art could settle into a progressive American art milieu at the time. The theoretical debates of the 1960s on the ontology of the artwork had created a climate where both strict minimalism and various material explorations could exist side by side. Minimalism had brought a kind of crisis in modernism's medium-specific understanding of the work and opened the doors for both a dematerialization of the work, i.e. conceptual art, and a post-minimalist rematerialization where the materiality was explored in its own right and where all conceivable materials were equally relevant. So I think in this context, Groth's use of drawing and weaving with this highly economical formal resources acquired a critical context to operate within, with natural points of reference in work of other artists in that milieu, like and previous generations, like Louise Bourgeois, Eva Hesse, and colleague Richard Tuttle, which, by the way, also contributes with the text in the book, Tuttle, that is. Back in Norway, though, it was more difficult to navigate with equal freedom among established categories. To a great extent, Groth's tapestries were regarded at the time as textile art by critics and the public alike. Betty Parsons, for her part, used Groth's tapestries as a way of testing how these textile works could operate within theoretical discourse that reigned in the New York art scene. Parsons wanted to investigate whether Jan Groth could, quote, bear the weight of avant-gardism, unquote, by insisting that Groth's tapestries and drawings were art and not craft. Groth's work helped to provoke skeptics by challenging the established categories and conventions. They came into the gallery looking for rugs. These aren't rugs, these are works of art, Parsons reportedly stated about Groth's work first exhibitions at the gallery. For Parsons, the white walls of the gallery and its implicit neutrality constituted a deliberate strategy in the promotion of a particular understanding of art. I tried to make the space as pure as possible, so only the picture dominated. The gallery was the first to be painted white and the first to show really big pictures when Pollock broke away from easel painting. This is Parsons being quoted to say. Parsons' pronounced understanding of the role of the exhibition space was crucial to how she could present such a varied and divergent group of artists. Indeed, looking at the gallery's program, one can start to discern certain decisive common features in the art Parsons presented over several decades, from abstract expressionism to post-minimalism. A monumental painting by Barnett Newman, a constructed painting by Richard Tuttle, or a tapestry by Groth, all share Parsons' fundamental faith in the artwork as an object with a latent ability to bear symbolic value, independently of changing trends and stylistic developments on the art scene. And this faith in the universal abilities or qualities of the artwork made it necessary to weed out all superfluous information and make the exhibition space as neutral and white as possible. So, looking back at Groth's exhibition in 1974, it is clear that the hanging of the show allows for certain sculptural qualities of the works to be foregrounded. The drawings, I'm talking now about the 1974 exhibition, the drawings are displayed in wall-mounted boxes of plexiglass, the row of rectangular regular objects playing with the different formats of the tapestries. Subtly, the works also enter into dialogue with architecture. For example, where a narrow horizontal tapestry repeats the form of a radiator on the wall beneath, or in the way a row of drawings and tapestries underscores the regimented horizontality of the rooms. That Groth seems to have been highly aware of these aspects of installation in 1974 points towards his new exhibition in the same spaces some 40 years later, where the relationship between artwork and space is now inextricably forged. The sculptural quality in Groth's practice was, in other words, well developed even before he began to work with sculpture as a medium. In a text for Groth's exhibition at the Guggenheim in 1986, the critic Carter Ratcliffe writes that Groth's art operates somewhere between minimalism's specific materiality and expressionism's organic lines. But it is interesting to note that Ratcliffe describes Groth's works first and foremost as an implied sculptural space. A few years later, Groth took the step out into sculpture's actual space. But the drawings and the tapestries already had sculptural qualities. The drawing and the materiality of the wax crayons, as well as the even more tangible object character of the tapestries, constituted objects in the exhibition space. And in this, Groth shared an attitude that was widespread in post-minimalism of the 60s and 70s, where artists were increasingly working with a strategy where one both objectified the picture and pictorialized the sculpture. Okay, so now I'm going to skip to a later part of the text, because then I go on to talk about the exhibition in this essay, the exhibition downstairs, kind of still emphasizing this sculptural quality of Jan's work. But then I'm going to read a bit more from a later part in the text where I talk more about the work as images, maybe. That's called Reading Jan Groth. Approaching Jan Groth's oeuvre as a mainly sculptural practice helps us to see aspects of his whole production that have, to a certain extent, been under-communicated. Although he himself refers to the tapestries as objects, and several people have emphasized the material quality of the drawings, there has maybe been less discussion of these various materialities as important contributions to post-minimalist sculptural practice, and more readings of them as pictures, i.e. as drawings, tapestries, and even paintings in a figurative sense. Now, it's of course not without reason that Groth's work have in all essentials been perceived and referred to as pictures. For with a consistent vocabulary of visual forms, the works appear inexhaustible in their openness, and at the same time inviting their meetings with specific interpretations and tentative readings. The line is at one moment perceived as abstract and the next as figurative or concrete. It can be read by some as expressive, charged with the artist's inner life, and in other cases as a strictly staged and planned design. It is only natural that this highly articulate languagelessness invites attempts at readings. Groth's titles also invite precisely this. All the tapestries he made with Benedicte Groth bear the title sign, a term that has also been used in exhibition titles, books, and texts about the artist. The sign has become a kind of general term for Groth's visual language, perhaps also riffing on the semantic echo between the Norwegian words tegn, sign or character, and tegning, it's in drawing. In semiotics, in linguistics, a sign is something that stands for something else. Groth's pictures can therefore be understood as concrete expressions which can be decoded to reveal a particular underlying context. Or they could in a semiotic term. But whereas in semiotics one can only analyze the meaning of the sign on the basis of cultural practice and established conventions, Groth's abstract signs are far more difficult to read unambiguously. This has not prevented art historians and writers in reading Jan Groth. Such readings are often informative and insightful contributions in the face of the inscrutability of the artwork, and they can help us reveal various topologies and transformations in the work over time. Forms, figurations, and visual strategies are repeated in Groth's works, and various groupings of different occurrences of signs have been identified. One could mention Karin Hellensjø's comprehensive monograph from a while back on Groth's work, which probably offers the most extensive attempt to catalog this vocabulary of formal signs. She identifies branch forms, a repeated V form, a number of other formal typologies. And in a more metaphorical sense, the lines become nerve fibers, natural formations, musical scores, and written characters. Looking at the reception of Groth's over many years, interpretation of these signs have pointed to both the Nordic landscape and to an inner landscape. That is the work of art as an external sign of an internal state. And both are equally relevant in the sense that the formal reductionism, the openness and the silence of Groth's idiom can find a response in the Nordic landscape, and that the line often lies close to organic natural forms. And the sort of distilled expressionism that many people identified in Groth's lines is also equally relevant. The directness in the drawing is like that of inscriptions and jottings. There appears to be no filter or distance in the creative act, which makes it tempting to read the drawings as a direct registration of something latent in the artist's subject. As part of an art historical placing, Groth's sign production has often landed somewhere between Nordic lyrical abstraction and American intellectual late modernism. But a third possibility can also be pointed out. Rather than national or geographical identity markers, Groth's distinctive form of abstraction might also represent a universalist, transnational, and archetypical formalism. Groth's drawings and objects have a charged or animated quality. Instead of categories such as abstraction or figuration, Groth's signs seem to take on a materialized existing or kind of a mode of being in line with other things in the world. The form is not necessarily deputizing for something else, nor is it a readable sign for an underlying meaning. It is rather an expression of something generally, even universally human. Again, it's natural here to look at the artistic intellectual climate in which Groth operated in the USA in the 1970s. At that time, many of his peers perpetuated an American tradition of transcendentalism in visual art, one that involved equal proportion of metaphysics and pragmatism. Work that is, on the one hand, concerned with a closeness to material, often rigorous, sober restraint, is at the same time, within much of minimalism and post-minimalism, also an expression of spiritual transcendence. A visual sign is normally independent of its physical form. A letter in the Latin alphabet or a line drawing showing a sun behind a cloud means the same whether this sign is printed on paper or it flickers past on a screen. With abstract art, it is different. It is the actual materialization in a unique object that elevates it out of pictorial culture to the reified status of the artwork. A reproduction of a painting in a book will never exhibit the same quality as the actual artwork. The materialization of the sign or the picture in a particular medium is an inseparable part of the ontology of the work. For modernist art, the work's self-reflection on its own medium was, of course, the very definition of good art. So the painting cultivated itself as painting. But one of the defining features of Groth's art is the way that he makes the sign migrate from one medium to another. Despite the fact that the individual artwork cultivates its own materiality in this way, and its physical quality as a thing and object, the sign, in the sense of image or visual motif, has the opportunity to migrate from drawing to tapestry, sculpture, or wall drawing. There seems to be a pragmatism and an absence of this modernist medium specificity in Groth's art that permits the sign to assume different materializations and contextual adaptations. Groth seems to be interested in precisely these transitions, how the line operates on the paper, unlike in the bronze sculpture in the space, or what qualities are added as the line migrates from the intimate format of the paper to the physical format of the architecture. What happens in the transition from the directness and immediacy of the paper drawings' registration of the motions of the hand to sculpture, or to the tapestry's laborious and time-consuming craftsmanship? Yet the crucial thing here is not that the readable sign in itself is moved in this way, but that the different materialities and media preserve a kind of ontological character of the work that is unique, yet still recognizable across the boundaries of the different media. Yeah, I think that's where I thought I'd end. In the next part of the essay, I think I go further into this discussion of the kind of movement in Jan's work between different media, different scales, different articulations of this otherwise very, very extremely sort of consistent practice. Yeah.
Thank you, Steinar. And maybe that's a good point to pick up the conversation, because obviously in the exhibition downstairs, that kind of movement, both between different materialities, as you say, in one way, Jan's work is extremely consistent over many, many decades, much more so than many other artists that you might think of. And the line has been articulated in so many different ways and so many different mediums. And of course, when you have such a consistent practice, small changes and small developments take on great significance, and that's something maybe we can talk about as well. But certainly in the exhibition downstairs, I think there's a few things to pick up on in your essay. One would be something about this sense of space and the way that the line, from its articulation on a sheet of paper, where the space around that line and its kind of placement on the paper activates the space of that sheet and makes that white space, which you talked about as well, it's never just white, it's never just empty space. It activates it, and it makes it as present as the line itself. And that's something that I think we thought a lot about in terms of the exhibition architecture and the way that the spaces of those rooms themselves, when you're in them as a viewer, are activated through the sculpture, of course, which has a more physical relationship with the space. But I think also, again, you talked about exhibition design through the way that Jan has installed those works and has played with the spaces and the architecture itself to produce something that is more kind of installed. It's more like a kind of installation at points, and perhaps nowhere more so than in Gallery 1, which is certainly a kind of new development, I think, in the way that Jan's working. So I'm throwing lots of different ideas in here. But to go back to that one that you kind of ended with, I think it's interesting as well that in the conversation that's in the book, there's a very nice conversation between Fredrik Varslev, who was last year's Festival Exhibitor, and Jan Groth. And they had an exhibition, a 3-person show, with Gallery Reese in Stockholm last year, where Frederick and another much younger artist, Matthias Faldbakken, invited Jan to show with them in a 3-person show in this gallery. And it was very much a kind of dialogue or a conversation between those 3 artists' works. But Frederick picks up on this quite a lot in terms of what you were just, I think, talking about. And I wonder if you could maybe expand and say something on what Frederick talks about is the kind of immediacy and the intimacy of the line, perhaps made on paper, using these kind of crayons that Jan has used over many, many years. And then its translation into something like the tapestry, where the same kind of gestural or expressionistic mark is then produced through a completely different method, which introduces a totally different temporality. It's a laborious, long process. It's a design. And it's something between that gesture and the intimacy and the immediacy of the gesture and the speed of that, and then the slowness of the design, particularly with the tapestries. But you could also think of that in terms of these new wall drawings that we'll come on to talk about. I don't know, maybe you could comment a little bit on that.
Yeah, I think the way when in our conversations with Fredrik as well, I think that was one of his initial interests, that because it seems almost like an impossibility to be able to maintain that presentness of that line in that medium of a tapestry that takes so long time to make, which is a completely different process, and also materially in the end has a very different texture and feel, but still to maintain within that that notion of a kind of expressionism, which is maybe, for lack of a better term, what we end up talking about. And which I guess maybe is why it's also been quite common to read those tapestries as paintings, because they speak kind of within the same language as this sort of balance between abstract expressionism and the big formats and the presentness of the artists moving towards a kind of minimalist object, I guess.
I think it was really interesting the way that you explored that through the essay, and that it was already all there in the 70s in some of those quotes that Betty Parsons was coming back with, where it wasn't, for me, it's not just the fact that it's a tapestry. And, she sort of said people arrived asking where the carpets or the rugs were. It's not just that the material has these connotations of craft, but that something in the methodology was also a million miles away from this kind of abstract expressionism idea of the immediate gesture and the kind of the inner life of the artist being somehow poured onto the canvas or something. And I think it's an extraordinary kind of tension that was there right at the beginning in Jan's work, which you talk about a lot, where he's constantly playing between these different, the pictorial image of what that might be, and then the kind of object quality of these things, and then their references to other materialities, or whether that's craft or the kind of monumental sculpture, the bronze, the kind of the apparently kind of solidity and strength of that against these very, very delicate lines. And maybe it's a good moment to just talk about the wall drawings here, because in fact, we've included one tapestry in the exhibition downstairs. And at a certain moment when we were talking about the show, Jan was making, as I said, extraordinary new work, and we thought, maybe we shouldn't include any tapestry. Maybe we should have an exhibition that is all entirely new work. But it became very obvious that it felt important to include one of those tapestries. Important for all the reasons that Steinar's talked about, and the way that it relates to the works as a whole. But what we selected was the very last tapestry that Jan made with his partner, Benedicta Groth. And Benedicta and Jan made all the tapestries as collaborations. They were all made together. And when Benedicta died, that aspect of Jan's practice ceased forever. So there will be no more tapestries. And so it felt not just poignant, although it did to some extent to bring the last tapestry in. It also felt like an underlining of where that, in some senses, represented an endpoint to a certain part of Jan's practice and a part of his work that he's very well known for. It was also a kind of beginning, and it was a kind of launching off point for the rest of the exhibition, in some senses. And one of the most exciting developments for us when we were working with Jan was when we began to look in the studio with him at a series of designs that he made, how many years ago, Steinar? 4 or 5 years ago?
Was
it longer, Jan?
2010.
9 years ago. So these are a series of sketches, drawings, really, not sketches, but drawings that Jan made as designs for wall drawings, which were never realized. And they were all made on a very long, thin format of paper. And I think it's 8 in the book. Yep, so 8 of these designs. And we began looking at these with Jan, and we realized that in the exhibition spaces here, we had in Gallery 1 walls which were very similar format, very similar scale. And this would be a wonderful opportunity to realize at least one of those. And initially, I thought we were going to realize one. But Jan, when we went back and saw him, he'd selected 2 of these drawings that would operate kind of in dialogue opposite each other. And I think it's a hugely kind of exciting moment for us to be able to realize those things some 9 years later in the spaces down there. But it's been very interesting because Jan has made one other wall drawing, I think, in Cappellendam, in a building in Oslo, where he developed this technique. And, they're not painted. They're made using these kind of, the same material as the drawings, these kind of waxy black crayon. And they're made using stencils. And there's a very similar relationship in a way to it's an entirely different method, but in terms of slowing that drawing down, reapproaching the drawing as a design almost, and then the way that the wall operates a little bit like the surface of the paper and allows for similar, almost pixelization that you get in the tapestries. There feels like there's something similar happening or a similar operation happening in those wall drawings now than was happening before in the tapestries.
Yeah, one of the most fascinating things I think with those drawings is, which I guess also is similar or comparable to the tapestries, but the actual practice of drawing when looking at the sketches in the book and knowing that the drawings were made as drawings for wall drawings, and they're in very, as you said, small format, 27 centimeters wide. So to try to imagine this practice of drawing when you are doing it, knowing that the very tiny mark of the crayon on the paper is actually quite a large sort of architectural mark, like it's really a super big presence in the space. So that's one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about. It's just that I cannot think of any other example of exactly the same drawing practice to be doing it in this way, because you made them for wall drawings.
Definitely, for me, they are not drawings. Actually, they are big walls already, even if it's a little slice of paper. And my assistants who have done an incredibly beautiful work. They got all kind of gadgets and technology and whatever at hand. But when I came with my little slips of paper, he said, "This is like Christmas." And up they were on the wall, down again, with the drawing back to me. And it ended beautifully. But also, they take a chance, I take a chance. But the beginning, my drawings, my doodles were actually thought big when I did them, even though they were only finger size.
Yeah, yeah.
And that translation is, I'm pretty good at putting other people at work. Also here in this wonderful building where everybody was milling around, but with a sense of music in the expression, that it's been an incredible experience. But with the drawings where I brought in the assistants, they, as you said, I've been doing it once before, but that was also little doodles thought for 21 meters tall, and I had a little slip of paper. And somehow the transition in the format is always, in this case, part of the beginning idea. So even it's small, I'm thinking big and not modest.
And was that the same when you made the designs for the tapestries?
Yes, it was exactly the same.
So you were thinking scaled up.
But then I also had to think reversed, because still, it's small pieces of paper. And I think a goal has been for me to try to somehow have the what is it, intima, and the monumental meet, which is quite impossible as a task. But here, we've practiced it for real. And somehow, almost at the age of dust, it happened.
Jan, while you've got the microphone, I'm going to use this opportunity to maybe just ask you a couple more questions, because again, the drawings that are in the exhibition downstairs, there are two different formats of drawings in the show downstairs. There are the smaller drawings, which is a format Jan has worked on for many years. And then there is a larger format of drawing, which is a new format, which you've begun working on.
Yeah, and that was pretty scary. Sort of in the old days, it was called a marine because it's a flat rectangle. And sort of for years and years and years, I was working on a higher rectangle. And then, for various reasons, it was a smaller format, and then I broke that now, trying to do something new. How new it is, I don't know, because my writing is obviously almost the same. But the challenge of the format has always been an issue, and that's what I tried to practice here. And if it's successful or not, I don't know. The smaller drawings is a result of my physical ability now, so that the writing has changed somewhat. And for me, that's pretty wild, since I haven't really, I'm not a person who makes experiment. I mean, you take a chance taking me in, and that's enough chance in my production.
But do you, in terms of the development of those drawings,
Yes.
Do you feel, how would you talk about the experience of working, for instance, on that larger format now? Did you feel it was changing the writing, if you like?
I felt it was difficult because I'm better at repeating what I've always done than going to something as scary as a new format.
Yeah.
And it takes a while, but I did it, and it functions, and let's see. If I'm going to creep back into the small format again, or I'm going to the distance between the smaller drawings and the big wall drawings, right now I cannot see what way it will go, but I hope to do. It's somehow more of a challenge to work monumental with the drawings. And can I have the meeting between something quiet and something somewhat loud? That's symphonic. And then I sort of get another challenge again. And you made me see that in offering me this opportunity and those walls.
Well, I mean, it is interesting because we started, and you started off talking about the exhibition in 1974 in those same spaces and the galleries now. And of course, as you say, architecturally they're the same, but they have a very different quality now. But I think even with the drawings, the way that you install them, I mean, I think it's extraordinary, the way that you know, some of them will be butted up against each other to form this kind of block of drawings, and then some of them will be individually placed. But again, going back to what you were talking about, there's the space of the drawing itself and the pictorial space, and then you almost install them as objects. And again, they have a very sculptural presence, actually, in terms of the way they're installed in those rooms. So there's this constant moving back out and out and out into these different spaces, which you both get drawn into visually as a viewer, but then implicated in physically as a viewer, you know, in terms of your relationship to these things in these rooms. And I mean, for me, it's been a kind of extraordinary lesson in how those spaces operate, working with you on this show down there as well.
One thing to add maybe to that is, which I talked about in the first part of the text, but which also was very funny to notice when looking at those images from '74, is that these new works couldn't really have been done at that time just because of the architectural features of the space, where they had sort of divided the wall between one section that was for the artwork and another sort of section above it. With the wall drawings, the whole wall is actually the piece, and to me that's also exactly in the same way as the drawings on paper. They're dependent on the physical format of the sheet of paper itself, and in this case it is the wall, which is these exact same limitations of frames for the line to exist within.
You know, the experience in '74 is quite different from this one, because I was very politely asked in, since I had an opening in my schedules, with the American exhibitions, which should continue to European museums. And I was very pleased and I was honored, and I had the feeling that there was a lot of politeness on both sides asking me, and it's been much worse this time because this was a challenge. So expectations has been quite difficult, and this time I feel I might actually grow on this.
But that's, yeah.
Thank you.
That's good. I'm going to ask you one more thing, Jan, because we haven't talked a lot about the sculptures. We've talked about them in the context of the rest of the work, but I wonder why we've got the opportunity, and you're holding the microphone. Could you say something about the new sculptures that you've made? I mean, just to be clear, there's a group of these new sculptures in Gallery 2 as you first go in, which Jan has called the Bundle. And these are actually individual works. There's a diptych, which is two sculptures operate as one work together, but the others are all individual works, but they've been installed in a very, very particular way. And they also operate as this kind of cluster in this group. And I think the relationship between them and these new drawings, particularly the large format drawings, is quite extraordinary, actually. And then, of course, there are these two very large, monumental sculptures in Gallery 1, which have this incredible relationship both with the room, but with those wall drawings.
But you know, the big ones haven't found words yet.
No.
No. But the bundle, which you actually named it bundle, and that the conditions I have in my studio is quite small. So they were individual pieces, but I had to stack them together, and you came and said, wow, a bundle. And then, as they are now, I realized that how I wanted them to go was to be kind of a rhythmic thing where they had, and then what still confuses me a little bit is the aggressive tone that they have.
Yeah.
Because Mr. Groth had gotten edges suddenly. And that is somehow a new experience for me, because I felt always that it was a sculptural condition, and it was kind of a more general thing, maybe a deeper thing even. And now the sculpture you're talking about, they look like weapons. And as I tried to explain to Frederick in his interview in the catalog, that even old artists are victims of their times, and these times we all have our shoulders up under our ears, and that might have influenced it. But the Frenchman says there's something, has a saying that it's to be stupid as a painter. And I'm still there yet. Not that I'm victimized by my own expression, but a lot of the work here hasn't found its verbal vocabulary yet.
No.
But you are helping me, now it's there.
And can I ask you one more thing? We talked about the way that the line, which is articulated through these drawings, can either be scaled up into the tapestries or the wall drawings. When you're making the sculptures, do you make drawings for the sculptures first? Is it a similar translation of line, or is it much more? Because I know you work with wax, with your hands. And is it similar
in the same as with, well, the tapestry I have it designed for, the sculpture actually sort of finds its form underway very much. So no, there isn't many sketches for that. I'm totally lost when I start. and then I feel a little bit better as it get along,
Yeah.
especially through the help of others.
Mm.
And there I'm very dependent on what actually others can transfer it in. But it's not a verbal process. It's sort of, I have this sort of magnetic finger I can point, and the people I'm working with.
Oops.
What was that? Wasn't it?
Don't worry.
And so I'm very dependent of the sensibility of the people that
Yeah.
I work with, and that has been extraordinary in this case.
Yeah. Okay, we've talked for nearly an hour. I wanted to just, it's a beautiful day, and I'm sure everybody's desperate to get back outside or get back into the exhibition, even better. But I would like to open it up for any questions from the floor before we do go. And that's either to Steinar or to Jan, if anybody has anything they want to ask or any comments.
No, that's good.
No? Well, in that case, it just remains for me to thank Steinar for joining me here, and to thank Jan for contributing from the floor in such a generous way, actually. It's very nice for you to speak like that. Thank you all for coming. As I say, the exhibition now is open until the middle of August. I hope that you have many opportunities to come back. It really does work better when it's quieter and it's not full of people. We're delighted that so many people are here this weekend. But if you can come back and see it when it's a little bit more empty, it's a very different and a very beautiful experience. So please do come back. To remind everybody again that Peter Shepherd Scarfed will be having another performance at 3 o'clock today. And then if you can't be here for that, tomorrow, as I say, at 12, 3 and 4:30. So thank you for coming. Thank you, Jan, and we hope to see you soon. Thank you.